We should be good. We should be good.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm going to have to mess with this mic because it's going to be some feedback. But, all right. Welcome, everyone. Wow. What a turnout. This is shocking to me. We're so excited that everyone could come out and join us tonight. We did not expect this at all. So kudos to all of you and your care and love for New Burlington. And welcome. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Taylor Stuckert. I'm the Executive Director of the Clinton County Regional Planning Commission. And in my spare time, this past semester, I've been teaching a course at Wilmington College as an adjunct professor. And I'll talk a little bit about that course in a minute. And that is what led to tonight's event. So I'm glad that all of you could come out and appreciate you being here. First of all, I have some people I want to thank. Shelby Boatman and the Clinton County History Center for hosting us and providing this space for us and helping with the exhibit. I want to thank the Genealogical Society and Gene Snyder for also sharing the space and program with us tonight. So thank you, Gene. I want to thank Wilmington College for providing me the opportunity to do this course, and for the students who are all...
I did talk to Tom. He could move it over there if you want him to. He could be here in 5 minutes.
I think we'll just keep this space.
Okay, I'll let him know.
Is everyone okay with that? We're gonna. The program's not that long. It's really just the launch of the exhibit. We had an offer to move to an adjacent church, but it might be too much work, I think, to do that. So I'll try to be quick and everything.
Thank you.
Taylor, you might be able to mess with like the treble and things on that to see if that's going to stop.
Okay.
There you go.
We'll keep adjusting this as we go. So again, thank you to Wilmington College for allowing me to teach this course. And the students, we have some students from my class who are standing in the hallway, and a few of them are going to speak tonight just briefly on some of their thoughts on New Burlington. And then I want to thank John Baskin, the author of the book, New Burlington, and for John's work in memorializing this story and really capturing a piece of its identity. We definitely would not be here tonight, or I wouldn't have had this class if it weren't for John's book. So I really am grateful that he wrote the story. So tonight is the launch for the New Burlington exhibit, Revisiting New Burlington 50 Years Later. It's a collection of photos from John's book, New Burlington, The Death and Life of an American Village. John has generously donated copies of his book, New Burlington, as well as In Praise of Practical Fertilizer, Thoughts from Near New Burlington. These books will be available from the History Center for $15, and 100% of the proceeds go to the History Center, thanks to John's donation. So.
If you pick it up, it might, I don't know, maybe like get it away from the speaker.
We'll try this. So I'm going to give a welcome and an overview of the course. I want to talk a little bit about the class and how we discuss the story of New Burlington. And then I have a few students tonight who are going to share some of their reflections on what they learned and read about in New Burlington, and then John's going to say a few remarks, and we're going to quickly get through this thing so that we have time for questions and discussion. And then, of course, you'll be able to see the exhibit. The exhibit will be here through August. So after tonight, you have the photos in the back tonight, but afterwards it'll be in the hallway for visitors to come and look at the exhibit and learn about the village throughout the rest of the summer. Real quick, I did not expect, obviously, this many people, but I'm curious, how many of you lived in New Burlington? Wow. That's very cool. Thank you all for coming again tonight. I didn't even have that question prepared because I wasn't sure. So as I mentioned, tonight's exhibit stems from a course I taught this semester at Wilmington College. It was an honors seminar titled On the American Small Town. I'm a planner in a rural county, and I grew up in Wilmington. I have a strong appreciation for small towns and had a desire to teach a course and to discuss a case study of a small town in our own county that no longer exists in New Burlington. And the objective of this course was to examine the history of small towns, the current state of small towns, and the future outlook for the American small town. It was a high-level review of the history and the evolution of these communities in America. And then at the latter half of the semester, we revisited the story of New Burlington, as I mentioned, as a case study. The course was intended to offer the students, who many of Wilmington College students come from rural communities, just like New Burlington and those in Clinton County. And so it was an opportunity for them to share their personal perspectives on the topic, reflect on how the material may or may not relate to their own communities. And then part of the course objective was to have the students connect that historical context from what they learned about the history of small towns, to connect that to present day conditions and draw on future implications for small communities in the United States. And we really, for me, I wanted the lessons learned from the New Burlington story to be something that the students connected with, and something that they could apply to their own communities or wherever they may live after college. So the book started, and we spent the first half of the semester on a book that's similarly titled as the New Burlington book, called The Death and Life of Main Street, by a Professor Miles Orvell from Temple University. And the Orvell book provided a historic overview of American expansion and the cultural narrative around small towns historically through present day. And one of the things that Miles looked at in his book was the mythical qualities of small towns that have developed over time, that have been sort of shared through art and media and other narrative forms, as well as some of the negative portrayals of small towns that sometimes maybe get missed in that narrative. And so Orvell was really examining how these mythical qualities or perceptions of small towns and these small communities exist alongside some of the challenges facing small communities today. And so early examples of that mythical narrative of the small towns, as I mentioned, came through many forms of expression. And one was through paintings. You guys probably maybe recognize this painting called Across the Continent by Frances Flora Palmer from 1868. Other examples of this expression are these lithographic maps. Many of you have probably seen maps like this. This was an early form of sort of placemaking and storytelling of communities as a way of showing the imagery of the place, almost like a marketing tool to attract people to small rural communities in the late 19th century. And of course, you might recognize this, but certainly an example that many people recognize are the decades of paintings by Norman Rockwell depicting the romantic, sort of idealized scenes from small town America through the 20th century. For Orvell, his project started through research on the Farm Security Administration. Do many of you recognize this photo? So the FSA Rural Photography Project was initially intended to focus on a way of showcasing poverty that was experienced in rural America in the early 20th century, and really was an effort to shed light on the need to provide modernization of rural America. But this project, in a way, also helped shape that romantic narrative of small communities from the early 20th century. And this, of course, continued. You guys know this movie. This is probably arguably the most famous example and most influential example of media portrayal of small communities and sort of depicting the romanticized mythical quality of small towns. So these were all sort of examples that many of these students today might have never, I think most of them had never seen It's a Wonderful Life. But it's important for them to understand that historic context for how we talk about small communities. And again, as I mentioned, these first examples were primarily focused around sort of the romanticized mythical qualities. But we also spent time in the class talking about some of the real local examples that the book juxtaposed with these mythical qualities, narratives of some of the challenges that have faced communities across the country throughout history, such as exclusionary behaviors, as segregation, brain drain, economic and technological shifts, many of the things that are discussed in the Burlington book, among many other things. In following this line of discussion, as a planner in particular, I wanted to discuss the narrative that physical changes can tell about a place. Many of you might recognize the Lomax Theater from Wilmington, Ohio, which was on Main Street across from the county courthouse. And so I showed the students some examples of how the physical environment in a community, as we've seen in the telling of New Burlington as well, how it has changed over time. And what are some of the things that are lost through that change, through those opportunities for community members to come together, to experience things together. This has a profound effect on place. And we've seen many examples locally of these physical changes in community and the effect that they can have on the place itself. Another example of how the rural landscape is placed. So that was sort of the downtown commercial landscape. I don't know if many of you recognize this, but this is Eastern Wilmington. We call it Rombach Avenue, about 1948. And of course, there's been a lot of change that has been seen there in that space. So that was sort of the background, the first half of the semester for these students. And one of the things that Orville talked about is the many ways in which we have tried to memorialize these romanticized versions of communities. And one example he touched upon in the book, I don't know if any of you have been to this place. This was a museum in Pennsylvania called Roadside America. Has anyone ever heard of that? No. It was actually the largest model town in the United States. And this gentleman spent like 40 or 50 years creating little models in this huge museum of sort of the memorialized small town. And I did not realize this when I started the class, but in a weird, strange, ironic twist, just this year, Roadside America closed. And they had to sell off all the model pieces from the town, this symbolic town, because they could not find anyone to manage the place anymore. And so, in sort of a symbolic way, but also in a very real way, the story of Roadside America tells the story of the challenges that many small communities have faced. Orville, really, a lot of this sort of leads up to the present day and really kind of the future in a way, but the focus sort of shifts to that physical framework for small towns. So I showed the Lomax and some of those other downtown areas, and he talks a lot about how this has come to form the framework for modern development. So I don't know if you recognize this. This is in Beaver Creek, a place called The Green. We have a lot of these outdoor malls and lifestyle centers, and interestingly enough, they're all built on the framework of small towns, right? They're built in the same physical design style as the American small town. So in a way, we have this form of community that we're losing, and then we have a new form of community that's sort of taking that design and moving it forward. And so this led up to the story of New Burlington. And as I mentioned, this was really the focal point of the class that I wanted to teach, but I wanted them to have that background information. And so I wanted the students, many of these students are not from Clinton County. Most of them in the class, I think I had one who was from Clinton County out of 12 or 13. They'd never heard of New Burlington. And they go to school here. They spend 4 years living in Clinton County. And so I wanted to give them a local case study of a small town that was lost. And I wanted them to go beyond just sort of the physical loss of New Burlington and learn some of the stories of individuals that live there, and really kind of focus the discussion around what makes a place a place. Is it the buildings? Is it the people? Is it the memories? This was where I wanted to see the class go in the latter half of the semester. And so, we began to learn the story of New Burlington, a town that was laid out in 1837. This is an aerial. We actually have a larger one here tonight, thanks to whoever brought that. But, it was located, as everyone here knows, in the northwest corner of Clinton County in Chester Township. This aerial is from 1968. Shows the layout of the town just before its disappearance. And as many of you know, New Burlington was historically affected by high waters. It sat right on Caesars Creek in Anderson Fork. And this regular confrontation with these waters came to be a way of life for the village and for the people of the village. What was interesting was that, you know, in the late 60s, we get the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and in the name of flood control, they decided that they would begin acquiring the village that was over 130 years old at the time. And what really caught my attention when I saw this map here in particular was that it fit the narrative that I had learned growing up in Clinton County about New Burlington. If you ask a lot of people about New Burlington, in my experience at least, it wouldn't be you all, many people think that the village is either wholly or partially under waters of Caesars Creek Lake. That's right, read my mind. Which this map supports. You can see the village, I'll zoom in on it in a second. And this map actually shows the waters going well past New Burlington all the way to Spring Valley Paintersville Road.
Oh my goodness.
You know, all the way up in the north. This was from John's files. So as I mentioned, you know, the waters, there's New Burlington right there. It's in a leg of the reservoir, and the lake itself is depicted as going as far north as Pogue's Corner, north of Pogue's Corner. And so I had never understood that growing up here my whole life. I was always under the impression that the village was underwater. And here again is that village aerial. I overlaid the today's street network over that, so the red line down the middle is State Route 380 as it exists today. And you can see here New Burlington Road, which used to go straight across, as you all know, now kind of curves down to 380, which were probably the primary physical changes that we see today. But as I learned, the historic center of downtown New Burlington is about 1.5 miles upstream from where the lake actually begins. And it wasn't until I did this course that I came to question, you know, why did New Burlington have to go at all? Very interesting. But as we know, it did go, and along with the streets and the people and the buildings, until there was nothing left but the memories. And so for this class and for tonight, for me, it was really, what does all of this mean? Was the loss of New Burlington simply the doing of the Army Corps of Engineers? Or does New Burlington tell us a bigger story about small towns? I feel that in the process of our course and the class and in the process of revisiting New Burlington, that we discovered that it was much more than the story of the loss of one village. We discovered a story of the life and death that is confronting small towns across this country every day. And I feel that it's important that New Burlington continue to shed light on this story and that we continue to revisit it for generations to come. So I wanted to do this exhibit, I wanted to do this class because this is an important opportunity not just to revisit New Burlington, but to revisit some of the challenges that are facing all of our communities like New Burlington. So with that, I would like to pass it off. I have a few students that I asked to come and share some of their reflections, and they volunteered their reflections on New Burlington through this course. And then following them, we'll hear from John Baskin. We'll have some questions, discussions, and then we have the exhibit. So which student would like to go first? Eli.
Just be careful.
Hello everybody, my name is Elijah Brock. I'm so glad to see so many people here talking about a town that I've learned about and was very fascinated with through this course with Taylor. So what's interesting is I'm actually from West Virginia. So I'm from Eleanor, West Virginia. It's another small town, so I know a thing or two about the small town, but coming here to Ohio, it's been interesting learning about the Clinton County area, and what I've really appreciated from this class is that I've gotten to learn a little bit more about the area that I go to school here. So taking this class with Taylor, I wasn't really sure what to expect at first. I heard American small towns and I thought, oh, we're going to learn about the history of a bunch of small towns across America. And what we wound up doing, I found, was significantly more interesting because we didn't just learn about the history of one or two specific small towns, but we learned about those mythical qualities of what makes a small town and how it fits into sort of the American legend. And when we got to New Burlington, I was so fascinated with this place in the sense of it almost seemed like a time capsule up to the point in which it was inevitably gone. Because up to New Burlington's end, it seemed that so many traditions and old ways that we don't really see today existed there. And I found that incredibly fascinating. And the thing that I found incredible in terms of the themes that we talked about was places inevitably are mortal, a lot like people. And we don't really think about places having mortality in that sense. You know, it's incredible that a place like New Burlington, where so many people live, that was so integral to people's lives, inevitably was gone one day. And it's crazy to think that Wilmington one day could have its last resident, or even a big city like New York could have its last resident. But with that mortality of place, I found it incredible because regardless of whether a physical space is there or not, New Burlington still lives on. Sure, you may not be able to go to New Burlington like you used to be able to. You can go to where it was, but the idea of New Burlington is still here. It lives on through the memories, it lives on through its people. We still have New Burlington in a sense because we still have the community of New Burlington here. And it's still going to continue to live on. And I think that that's important, that regardless of whether these small towns seem small or insignificant in the grand scheme of things, I think that it's important that we remember these places, because these places are a people and a community, and it's a part of America that is so important to so many people's lives. And so I'm glad that we're here and we're talking about New Burlington, and that we can continue to let that memory live on through having events like this and talking about it. So thank you so much. I'll go ahead and pass it on to my peers.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to follow up that, but didn't expect that from him. But I'm Levi Coons. I'm from West Portsmouth, Ohio. If any of you know where Portsmouth is, it's west of that. And my experience with living in a small town is a little bit more similar, I'd say, because, well, the distance is closer, obviously, than West Virginia. But I took this class because when I saw it listed, I thought it was interesting, because I'd never thought about an academic side to learning about small towns and what makes small towns small towns. It's just something that you kind of feel like is in American culture, and that's something that as we've taken the class, we've expanded upon a lot, especially with the mythical side of it. What makes us think a small town is a small town? And I think a lot of the things we've expanded upon have been really profound, one of which I wrote down a little ditty about, is how do we make small towns survive? Because today, I think it's very prevalent that it seems like almost any small town you think about it like dying, pretty much. You think about small towns in a sense of going away. And we have brought this question up several times in class of what do you do to stop that from happening? And there's not really a definite answer, but an answer we've roughly stumbled across is, well, small towns have to adapt. They have to adapt to the times, but then that doesn't make you a small town, really, because there's this culture in the small town of it's your own little pocket away from the rest of the world, where you don't have to worry about those big issues, where you can be at peace and you don't have to worry about what's going on in New York City or Columbus. Big town for Ohio. And now I've lost my train of thought, so let me actually just start reading now. My final thoughts after finishing the book was that it was very melancholic, because having hindsight and reading all the stories, you know as a reader that like it's going to be gone by the end of the book, and you're reading all these stories about these people's lives and all these things they're doing, which seem so emblematic of a small town. Talking about like the blacksmith in town and him having apprentices that he works with, or people like when motorbikes were first invented and people who would ride horses would complain about them because they scared their horses, and how all the young people were riding motorcycles. But what I took from the small town culture that I saw in New Burlington is that there's a dangerous tendency to rely on the next guy to solve your problems, because it's almost like you lean too hard into that small town ideal of this is my pocket away from the rest of the world. And the problem with that is if you don't do anything to protect that pocket, then it goes away. So getting away from the wider world is part of the allure of living in a small town. But even then, you can't ignore every problem that knocks on your door and leave it for the next guy to deal with. Like a disease, it'll fester and kill a community the longer that behavior lasts. And as we saw with New Burlington, the people of the town, by roughly the 50s, according to the book, by roughly the 50s, there was this sense in the town that it was dying and going away, and it was a lost cause, and no one could really do anything to save it. So when the Army Corps came and said, we'll buy all this land from you, slowly, one by one, people started giving in, and that small town went away. And ironically, didn't have to, because the reason the Army Corps was buying all the land, as Taylor said, didn't come to pass. So the question is, how do we keep our small towns without ruining what makes it a small town? And I didn't really have like a final end point. I didn't have like a good stinger, because I didn't expect to be going up against something like Eli with his extremely profound speech that he made. So I'll just pass it on to my next speaker.
I also have mine on my phone. I'll always do. Hello everyone, my name is Jody Jennings. I'm a second-year political science major at Wilmington College. I come from a small town as well. It's called Bucyrus, Ohio, if you've heard of it. Okay, a few people have. That's awesome. If they haven't. And today I'm just here to share some thoughts with you guys on progress as it relates to the New Burlington reading, as well as the idea of small towns in general. So one of the things I was left with after reading New Burlington was that even though a town might change physically, oftentimes the characters that live within the town will stay the same. So like every person on the wall back there was occupying a different role in their town, just like every single one of you sitting in the chairs right now is doing the same thing now. So while this is interesting to think about, I think the most applicable way to digest this knowledge is to come to and recognize the conclusion that progress is not linear. So progress is not linear. Instead, it is cyclical. We see that this holds true throughout history. There have been time periods where it's been really prosperous and everyone is doing well, and there's been time periods where things have not been so great, such as a pandemic. While this cyclical nature is important in itself to recognize, the next logical conclusion I came to after realizing this was that progress cannot be made by waiting for all of the bad ideas to die out or by voting it out. So one of the questions posed to us in class was something along the lines of, do you think new generations are more tolerant than that of their older counterparts? Although the class had different answers, the answer I settled on and will share with you today is that, again, if you look at history, that has never been true. Our generation has grown up our entire lives being told that we will fix things. In first grade, I sang a song called We Are the People of the 21st Century, and it was all about that. So as early as then, I can remember that being told to me. In class, I called this attitude out as a way to push off responsibility onto younger people. And I urge you as an audience member today to recognize this behavior when it happens in front of you. Another solution people sometimes give is that if you don't want to wait for people to die off or ideas to die off, just vote them out. And here's why that won't work either. Systemic problems require systemic solutions, and voting does not equal systemic fixes. And until we have viable options running that will enact those systemic changes, voting isn't going to change anything. Now, don't misinterpret me. I'm not telling you not to vote. Please continue to do so. I'm just saying that it's not enough. So instead of just spending all of your effort one time a year at the ballot box, maybe spend a little more effort just sporadically throughout the year, organizing within your community. And just for example, like your workplace is a great place to start. Just getting to know people, finding out what they want out of their time in your community. So something that growing up in a small town has taught me is that even though voting is a bit of a dead end, collective action never is. Systemic change is possible, although perhaps far away in the future. Do what you can now to break the cyclical nature of progress into something more permanent. Until then, remember that when it comes to progress, letting off of a particular issue for even a moment is the same thing as going backwards. It's easy to see this as true when looking at some of the regressive policies being pushed today in the absence of progressive legislation to counteract that. And finally, I will leave you with this. We are all stronger together than we are apart. Thank you, everyone.
Hello. My name is Peyton Mullins, and unlike my other classmates, I'm not from a small town. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. But my grandparents are from Ripley, Ohio, so I did weekends on and off there. So I kind of got the experience of a small town that is just about the same as the experience that you get to see in a movie or read in a book. I got to experience the mythical, really interesting, fun parts of being in a small town, and then didn't really have to deal with the having the right last name growing up in high school or things along that nature. So, as I was reading the New Burlington book, I was presented with a lesson on community that I really, like I said, only got to read about in books or see in movies, aside from my small interactions with this community growing up on the weekends. However, to me, New Burlington shows the sorrow of compromise in a small town while also finding pride in your decisions. There's a chapter in the book that tells the story of Irma Evans, who was a school teacher in New Burlington. And her testimony talks about how excited that she was to be able to make these impacts on the lives of young people in this small town. However, as you were reading, you could catch the undertones that she said she never wanted to be a school teacher. This wasn't her dream job. She didn't have a dream job. And that was really sad to me, to feel like she was trapped or confined in a place, tied to place, because she's tied to community, and sacrificed what her dreams were or what her desires in life were because of that. So, because of that, I began reading the New Burlington book in the sense of how does this pose as a warning? So, in the book, there's a quote that says, "Simple truths are the most unbearable." And I think that the simple truth that we have to face is that the physicality of New Burlington is gone. And that could become the reality of many other small towns in America if something is not changed, which we have all talked about. We discussed how do you save a small town while maintaining those mythological aspects of a small town. And that's something that I wanted to continue to ponder. That's something that, as I didn't grow up in a small town, but I go to a small college, and in many senses you experience the same ideals of small community there, that I want to keep thinking about and keep learning about. And I think that as we are also thinking about New Burlington, there's another quote in the book that was a quote from Joshua Scroggie that says, "A story you see is ultimately not about the facts, but rather how people feel," which basically says that it means much less what really happens or the actual factual information of the timeline of what happened, and much more about the community that people felt in that place. And I think that this is a really important thing to implement into the future of small towns. And because I love the mythological aspects, I love to watch the movies and read the books and go on the weekends. But how do we make that a place that I want to spend my weekdays in and make my life without feeling like I'm going to put to risk all of the desires that I have in life. So I think that the thing I want to leave everyone to ponder most is, what does place mean? Place is physical, but place is something you can carry with you. How do we make these good parts of small town not only have to happen in the small town? How do we make these things available to everyone that wishes to feel them and create this great sense of community everywhere? And yeah, I think that's something that would be really beneficial in any part of society.
All right. Can we give another round of applause to these students? I gave them very little instruction. I just said, I want you to reflect on your experience in the class in New Burlington. So they did a great job, and I thank them for being willing to talk to such a large audience tonight. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Mr. John Baskin, the author of New Burlington.
You might have to hold it.
Here's a sobering fact. When I came to New Burlington, I was only a few years older than Taylor's students. Here's another odd fact. In the last 2 or 3 years of New Burlington's life, there weren't this many people in this room in the entire village, so I don't know where all of you come from. Must be a lot of imposters in here. I came to New Burlington by accident. A friend of mine, an investigative reporter from Lebanon, told me about what was happening there. And soon after, I started noticing the Sunday feature articles. They sort of treated New Burlington in a highly sentimental fashion. It was like New Burlington was sort of like a loose dog, and if you wanted to fix that, you would just simply go out and buy another dog. So I had a problem with the definition that was given in these newspaper articles, because I was between jobs as a journalist, but nothing else to do. And I thought, there's got to be another story here, because ostensibly an entire village, all at once, is being wiped off the face of the earth. That has to mean more than these feature stories that were showing up in those newspapers. So first, what I saw was there were 2 stories. The first one was, is Alma Plummer here tonight? That's only sound, yeah. Is Alma here? Anyway,
Right here,
the first
right here.
story sort of belonged to Alma and Roger Plummer, because it talked to me about it was the institutional caprice of the Corps of Engineers. And I learned that through Alma, who was really forthright and strong and lost her wonderful brick home down in the bottomlands of what was going to be the lake. But boy, it wasn't for her trying. So I did what I think at last count was 5 national magazine stories I sent Alma all the way from Los Angeles to New York and back. It didn't save her house and property, but what it did was it let people know what happened to her and what was happening to the people in the village that was past the sentimental notion of this town was disappearing and so what. The Army Corps of Engineers was an occupying power, and they treated the villagers as subjects. It reminded me, since the Vietnam War was going on at the time, it reminded me of a famous saying that came out of the Pentagon, someone explaining a bombing raid and said, we had to destroy the village in order to save it. And that was sort of what the Army Corps of Engineers ended up doing with New Burlington. That was one story. It was the story of the institutional skullduggery, and while the Corps probably didn't do anything that was adroitly illegal, they manipulated the villagers and they treated them abusively. And none of the people that were there then understood exactly what was happening to them. But the story that was more interesting to me, it came more to what Taylor has been doing with his class and with his students. It was, and this is what the book came about, it was a generational story that so many of the villagers and the people around the village were very old. And what I saw very quickly was that their particular culture and their manners and their way of being would soon be gone. Their methods of working, the agriculture that they practice. Interestingly now, with organic farming and newer methods of farming, which John can tell you some things about, it sort of brought back earlier of the methods that actually the people in New Burlington, the old farmers, would tell me about. But it was fairly easy to see that, generally speaking, this all was going away. It wasn't just New Burlington. It was a way of life that extended across the country. And it affected agriculture, it affected people's manners, it affected their personal culture. All of these things were affected. When I came to the village, George Lovett, you remember George? He gave me he let me stay in his house the last year. He had 1 year before it's going to be torn down. It's a wonderful brick house, the last house in the village. George had already taken the systems out. Charlie helped me put a Franklin stove in the chimney of the big front room of the house. And to heat water, I used a stock heater that farmers use in their barn. The whole acreage, whatever was there, which must have been 2 or 3 acres, it was all surrounded by a fence. And so George let me stay in the house that last year if I would keep an eye on his livestock, and he was usually there every couple of days. So you had to watch out because there were 2 sheep, including a ram. It was really cantankerous. And you had to learn that you didn't want to run from him. What you did was you let him come up till you put your hand on his head. You'd hold him like this. So my favorite image from that isolated year in the last house in the village was a pair of Seventh-day Adventists who climbed over the outside gate. And they came up the long driveway with a huge stack of pamphlets. And as they got halfway up, old Clyde spotted them. And they didn't know to stand their ground. What they did was they took off. Clyde chased them. Pamphlets went all over the lane. They both leapt over the fence, and Clyde is inside snoring. And then to add insult to injury, Clyde walked back up the lane and ate all of their pamphlets. What helped me most that first year was Charlie McIntyre. Charlie sort of, probably against his better judgment, he took me in, he introduced me to people, he taught me the local customs, he showed me how the language worked, and he taught me how to make maple syrup. Finally, what I saw was this wasn't all altruistic on his part, because he got me so that I could run all these lines in his syrup, which is the worst possible job, because what happened in making maple syrup, we used tubing instead of just trees and spiles. We used tubing that connected, tubing would run, I don't know, hundreds of yards back up in George Arledge's woods or wherever. And what you learned was that where the squirrel would bite into the tubing, and let the syrup pour out, let the sap pour out on the ground. Wherever that was the last place that you would look. If you thought it was the last place on the run, it would be the first place. If you went first, it would be last. You could never outguess what the squirrels were doing. So, Charlie gave me such a sense of who the villagers were, because he would also, sort of off the record, he would steer me, or he would tell me, or this is what they're really saying, or this is what is meant by that. So he was a grand source about that. He's really smart, he's very droll, he was very funny, so we had a similar kind of sense of humor. One day Charlie got tired of splitting firewood, and he said to his wife, "I'm going to build me a log splitter." And his wife said, "You can't build a log splitter." Then Charlie said, "Somebody builds them." And he built the most beautiful log splitter anyone had ever seen. He scrounged an old engine from somewhere. He put it on what appeared to be a 6 or 8 foot length of I-beam. And the hydraulic system was so strong and sophisticated that you could split everything from infinitives to a 4 foot wide piece of oak. And as I recall, its tires were 2 white walls that looked like they came off of an old Buick. Anyway, I don't know what happened. What happened to that splitter? It should be in the Smithsonian. Charlie's kids were really young at that time. I think Greg, who was in the back, must have been about 7 at the time. This was a photograph that didn't appear in the book, but what it shows is all of us were cute when we were young. So, Greg already at age 7 or 8 already knew half of what his dad knew. And one day, and I knew none of these things, couldn't do any of this. I barely understood how a doorknob worked. So I'm in the back of the sugar truck that we drove into the woods, and has a pump on it. I'm trying to get the pump started. Greg comes out with a look of disgust on his face, says, "Help me up." I pick up Greg, I set him in the back of the truck. He does a few adjustments. He starts the pump. Then he says, "This way, dumbass." So, I followed Charlie around for at least those 3 seasons to write what I always thought was my own favorite book, the essay on maple syrup and how it worked. And it was only 1,500 words. So Charlie, being a frugal countryman that he was, he only gave me 500 words a season until I finally got my 1,500 words. I remember the opening of one of those years when we got the sugar house going for the first time. It was at night, and the steam from the boiling sap was rising, and suddenly some excited motorist roars into the yard, races up to the porch and said, "You guys know that little barn out back there is on fire?" Now, back to Taylor's class, because after all of this time, what did we learn and what did it mean? Because Taylor's ideas of how fragile community is what I think people should take away from what happened to New Burlington. Because community isn't just a group of people in a place. An abiding community requires a knowledgeable constituency, and it requires a historical knowledge. Otherwise, you're not sure what you're acting upon. Would New Burlington have lasted without the Corps of Engineers? Good question. I'm not sure. Because what Taylor and I think is with apologies to our existing places, Port William may be the new Burlington. Midland I think those places are severely endangered. And moreover, I think that Wilmington is probably endangered in its own way. So the lessons of what happened to New Burlington and why the people weren't able to fight what occurred to them, it needs to be applied to Wilmington today as well. The interesting thing to me now, that's what happened in the culture all of this time. I don't think what happened to New Burlington would happen to a place these days, because unfortunately or fortunately, people are more cynical and they're also more aware. So I don't know that the engineers would get away with what they did to the people of New Burlington. People of New Burlington had no experience with what happened to them. So when Taylor started showing me the students' writings, it was pretty impressive. It was pages and pages, 40 or 50 pages of their thoughts, because they were dissecting what was happening inside the book. And they always saw the material as being about community, almost wholly so. What the villagers had, what they lost, and what were the lessons for us today. I'd want any of those kids on my planning commission. And ultimately, what Taylor and the students did was honor a place that's been gone for half a century. Because under their attentions, the place and their people have come alive again. When I pulled the photographs together for Shelby, I said to Taylor, this is all that's left. I was really wrong, because you all are bringing your own memories here. And these students, people who weren't born and people who didn't know even a year ago what New Burlington was, probably now keep in their minds a handful of the people of New Burlington who have been gone a half a century or more. So I would say that resonance is sometimes the best gift.
Thank you, John, for sharing that. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. As John was talking, and as I've talked to the students about as well, you know, what are some of the ways in which we can preserve a place, even if it is only in memory? And I think it's important to recognize the space we're in tonight, which is the Clinton County History Center. And this is one of those spaces that's integral to a community and to the telling of stories of community for generations to come. So I'm not sure, I'm going to do a poll on how many of you are members of the Clinton County History Center.
I'm watching.
But I would hope that after tonight we have many more. Just through experiences like this, we obviously need a bigger space at the History Center so that we can continue doing programming like this and bring people together. So with that, I thank you all again so much for coming tonight. The photographs from the exhibit are around the back of the room, so if you get a chance, take a look at them before you leave. If it's too crowded, you want to get out of here, they'll be here until August, as I mentioned. And we'll all stick around. And as I mentioned, there are books on sale for $15 each. We have two of John's books available, and as I mentioned, he donated these, so 100% of the proceeds go to the History Center. So if you need a copy, make sure you grab one on the way out the door. So with that, I guess we'll take some time. We have a few minutes. I know it's crowded in here, but are there any questions or thoughts or discussions or anything that people wanted to share after this program?
I think having a local newspaper is very important, because that is a way of us to communicate with each other and know what's going on in town.
Absolutely. If you didn't hear that, she said that having a local newspaper is important. That definitely came up in our conversations about some of the core components of a thriving community. Anyone else? Any thoughts or questions? Yeah.
Why didn't the lake come up for the original?
That's a great question. I was saying after I learned that you could do a whole doctoral thesis on on that situation and investigate the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers paperwork and understand the thinking. When John and I were talking about it, we came to the same question. I don't know if anyone here knows the answer to that, but
I've got a kind of a guess. I think that shows what the Corps defined as the high water mark, which I don't know that anybody has ever heard of, the lake getting that high. But that's where I think the dam is set.
500-year flood.
so that's what, and I thought that too, but on that map in the upper corner, it actually says where the reservoir will be.
Yeah.
So they viewed it as a reservoir, and there's a thin black line around that they viewed as federal property.
Yeah.
So we had thought that same thing as well, that maybe it was just the floodplain at the high water mark. And I don't know the year of that map, and this is where I think it'd be an interesting deep dive going back and looking at what the thinking was at the time.
Well, you know, that didn't only affect New Burlington, because where we lived on Brimstone Road in Kingman, we lived down in the hollow there, and we had to move.
Absolutely.
Because that was considered, and there's never been any water down in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it affected a lot of areas. Oh my goodness.
I don't know what that sound is, but
It's a flood.
yeah.
It's weather.
Yeah. Okay, well, with that sound, I think that maybe we should. Yeah, sure. Shelby.
I just want to make a quick comment. I'm Shelby, the director of the History Center. Following tonight's discussion, I really would like to keep this conversation going. And we actually don't have a lot on New Burlington here at the History Center. So I am interested in pursuing some oral histories, which would be me interviewing New Burlington residents and anyone that was impacted by this episode and this moment in history. So if you are interested in an oral history project, if you either, I don't know if you can speak to me tonight because I might be a little busy, but call me or email us so I can get you on a list to possibly interview you for posterity. That would be helpful.
And continue if you want, to bring items to the History Center. Was that
Yes.
your call? Did you ask for that in the event? Or it was great that some of you brought
No, I
photos.
didn't. That was,
that was really
yeah.
awesome. So thank you for those of you that did that.
I did not, but that was amazing, yeah.
All right. Well, again, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. Feel free to stick around, look at the exhibit, and we'll be around. Thank you.
Can we make an announcement before people leave? Can we make an announcement?
Oh, yeah.
Before people leave?
All right, we have one more announcement before everyone leaves. I got a request to make one announcement. That on Saturday, May 28th, the Harveysburg Historical Spring Gathering will be the Harveysburg Historical Spring Gathering hosted by the Historical Society. So that'll be at the Harveysburg Village Office Building. They'll have Quaker historian Tom Ham there from Richmond, Indiana, and some refreshments. So if you want more information, Rebecca Godfrey's here. Talk to her about it. Alma's here as well. Thank you all again.
Speaking of refreshments,
there's refreshments at the back. Thank you, Gene.
she's going to be here tonight.